Hello, I'm Mai Ling Chan, Director of Growth and Achievement at Cognixion, and I'm really excited to have the co-founder of Cognixion with us today, as well as a notable Santa Barbara neurologist who's also a specialist in the area of brain-computer interface. Today, we're going to explore the possibilities of Cognition's new BCI and AR, which is brain-computer interface and augmented reality technology for augmentative and alternative communication, as well as potential implications for research in other fields. So let's bring on Andreas and Dr. William Goldie. Hello, Andreas.
Hi, Mai Ling.
And hello, Dr. Goldie.
Hello.
So lovely to have you, and I really thank you for joining us today. What I'd like to do is start with Dr. Goldie. In addition to a lifetime of service as a pediatric neurologist in the Central and Southern California area, you've been a bit of a pioneer in the area of brain-computer interface, and I was hoping you could share a little bit more about your work in this area.
Yes. First of all, I want to make sure that you understand, I was born and raised in California, Southern California, in fact. And it's kind of interesting that I decided to go to college at Stanford and got very much involved in the psychology department, particularly child development. And at that point, got very interested in children with autism and learning disabilities, especially those who were born with brain malformations or severe complications, particularly with sensory development, vision and hearing. And I was beginning to do some research in the psychology of brain development when I realized that what I really needed to do was to learn about the body in general and especially anatomy of the brain. And so I went off to medical school at the University of California, San Diego, where I was very, very fortunate to get involved with some of the leading neuroscience experts at that time, particularly in what was referred to as clinical neurophysiology. And what that means is measuring brain electrical activity, basically the resting brain activity, which is electroencephalography or EEG, but also induced electrical activity, which in those days, it was kind of interesting because they were just developing computerized analysis of brain waves, and we were using very, very fancy computerized analysis to look at all of the structure of the brain waves. And then we realized there was actually very, very predictable responses to specific sensory inputs. And the interesting thing was that every time that you would be exposed to a certain type of visual stimulus, it would develop a very characteristic pattern in the brainwave activity. And then we found that even sensory stimuli and auditory stimuli would do this. And we started referring to this as evoked potentials. And there was this also very fascinating thing. One of the researchers there was doing some really interesting work on contingent negative variation called CNV waves, which is when you're kind of expecting things to always happen in a very, very characteristic manner. And then all of a sudden it didn't happen. And your brain would have this fascinating response wave, which would mean that it had expected something that didn't occur. And it was fascinating to realize that the brain has really phenomenal ability to kind of set patterns and expect patterns and respond when the patterns are different from expected. And I got really excited about it to the point where I then went on and spent another year in direct fellowship just studying this clinical neurophysiology at Boston at the Massachusetts General Hospital, and actually got certified in clinical neurophysiology, and then got hired onto the faculty of the University of Texas, Houston and developed a whole program there and doing some basic research in evoked potentials. And we were able to do it clinically, particularly in patients with multiple sclerosis, but we started doing it also in patients with sensory deficits, visual deficits, auditory deficits, and sensation deficits in general. And we had quite a bit of not only basic research, but also clinical research. And then I got recruited to the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, where I headed their clinical neurophysiology department. Unfortunately, got involved in some of the administrative chaos that was going on at the time, and elected to then leave Children's Hospital to come up to the Ventura area to head up the Pediatric Neurology program and do also head up their clinical neurophysiology program here in Ventura County at the Ventura County Medical Center. Got involved in quite a bit of clinical development to the point where we collected a huge number of neurologically injured patients all over the area that had a lot of cognitive and sensory complications, and I've been involved with them ever since, and of course been very much involved in the computerized assessment of brain dysfunction. And I guess that the brain computer interface concept has been a part of my work for over 40 years.
So let me ask you, what was your most exciting part of all of this work?
I didn't get that.
Oh, I said, what was your most exciting part of all of this work that you've done in this area?
Exciting part. Well, I think one of the most exciting things to me is seeing a brain injured patient who cannot communicate and is considered as profoundly mentally retarded or so dysfunctional, they're just put off in a room somewhere. And then all of a sudden you found, oh my gosh, they can communicate at a very high level if we just give them special methods. This has been amazingly exciting to suddenly like tap into what's going on inside that nobody had been able to appreciate until we were able to open up that interface.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Goldie. As a speech language pathologist, I can absolutely appreciate that, and I appreciate you for all the work that you've done in this space. Let me ask you, Andreas, how did you get involved in this area of assistive technology and very specific to communication?
Well, I came into the industry from a really unusual path. I didn't study in college or university, neuroscience or engineering. I don't have a CS degree. My background is actually product design and visual communications. So my background has been in trying to understand the psychology of the human, understanding how to create user interfaces that are delightful, easy to understand, reduce cognitive load. So as a designer, I went to design school. But a lot of the things that I spend a lot of time over the last 25 years thinking about, and how do you translate deep human insights into how the brain functions or desires or an individual's relationship with technology or with the content that they're trying to interact with or read or consume, translated really well to the needs of neurotechnology. But I didn't come into neurotechnology purely because I wanted to get into the science. Actually, a set of personal life events charted my course into this field. When I was younger, around 15 years old, my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So as a young boy, I learned what it was like to care for an individual with declining mental capacity and memory. And so the memory care aspect of what I learned developed a deep sense of empathy and understanding for what we now call the caregiver. And later on in life, I went to design school, and then I went to work in large technology companies and small technology companies. One of my first career moves was to go to work at IBM in the early 90s. And I was involved with the IBM Global Services Organization. And I helped design the very first intranet for IBM, back with HTML1 and when hyperlinks were the big innovation. And progressively through my career, I've applied human factors and design and psychology into creating delightful user interfaces with interacting with lots of content or information. Progressively moved on to other industries. I went into the insurance industry. I was the creative director for Progressive Insurance and was involved in redesigning the progressive.com website, and was able to actually make a pretty substantial impact to the business by applying smart human factors design to the user experience of quoting and buying and getting claim services. And then after leaving Progressive, I went and joined a company, Philips Electronics, which is based out of Amsterdam. And I worked with their organization internally. And I worked across all of the different Philips business units, applying design and design thinking and strategy to the different trajectories or the different businesses' goals. So I helped with the lighting organization figure out certain kinds of roadmaps for certain technologies that are lighting technologies, which we now enjoy today, such as solid state. I worked within the healthcare organization to help collaborate with research and the business to innovate new products, and then also consumer electronics. And then after that, I left Philips and I went to work for a company called Citrix, which many people know worldwide, which I worked with the software as a service business. And so I worked with Citrix to help make things simpler, to understand that simplicity can make a huge difference in preference and brand loyalty and customer loyalty, and was able to make a big difference while I was at Citrix. So taking all of those professional experiences from innovation and design and human-centered approach to interaction, understanding business and technology, hardware and software, I developed a great toolkit in my personal career. But I wasn't really ready for what came next in my life, which was when my mom came to visit with me when she turned 70 for her birthday. And when she arrived, she wasn't feeling well. And she was admitted almost immediately into the ICU with severe pneumonia. And the pneumonia, they had to triage her situation, and she had to be intubated and restrained. And so she was, like many people today with COVID, she was helpless in her own body, unable to communicate orally, and unable to use her arms in any meaningful way to communicate or control her world. She was in the hospital for weeks. And then she survived, but she was later discharged with a battery of supports and rehabilitation from skilled nursing all the way through in-home care. And so I learned through the full continuum of care just how vital communication is and how much we take it for granted. And simply being able to say yes or no and have enough agency to determine your own care if somebody isn't there to communicate for you. That was the catalyst for getting me into what's now the AAC industry or assistive technology. Because after that, I really had a burning desire to figure out how many people in the world were affected by communication disorders. And I was blown away to learn that 500 million people worldwide have some form of disability that makes it very difficult or nearly impossible to communicate orally. And many of those individuals are mistaken for having low cognitive ability because what's interrupting their central or peripheral nervous system, which inhibits their ability to speak, is a motor problem, not necessarily a cognitive problem. So by looking at a subset of that 500 million, which is roughly 100 million people, we created a company to help bring the most advanced technology to the problem and find a way to scale it at a worldwide level. and make it possible for people to communicate using the least amount of effort possible. So that means the least amount of physical energy expended in order to accomplish the goal. And in technology terms or design terms, that user interface is called an I/O, input output, and it's really transactional. Like a touch screen, you touch it and it does something. That's the I/O. So for some people, a touch screen is just fine. For other folks who maybe can't use their arms, or they have difficult time controlling their body, or they have a difficult posture, or they can use their eyes or other sense, then we started looking at other ways to interact with technology. So as a company, we prototyped many different I/Os with the intention of helping to reduce the time from intention to outcome. What's really important is understanding cognitively what someone's intention is and understanding what they're trying to accomplish, and how can we employ technology to enable the human, the person, to accomplish that outcome with less energy expended. And so where that led us, if you follow that story, is to go to the direct source. So we focused on how can we actually develop a direct brain-computer interface, or a BCI, that would allow you to use non-invasive wearable technology. You don't need to have surgery for it, but it needs to be extremely reliable, easy, accurate, and fast. It needs to feel like it's an extension of your body and your mind. And you need to be able to use this brain-computer interface to control something. And so that something needs to be some kind of digital interface. And so what we ended up doing was inventing a new product, which combines brain-computer interface technology with augmented reality into a single wireless wearable solution that could be used anywhere.
That's excellent, Andreas. And as a speech language pathologist, I am absolutely so biased to tell you how excited I am to know about this. And we've been sharing it within the AAC community and with other experts, assistive technology experts. Up until now, BCI, or brain-computer interface, has mostly been focused on data capture and analysis. So, for example, tracking sleep patterns, finding out if you have stress levels, helping with meditation. So can you explain how is the headset different from these types of technologies?
Yeah, in the simplistic terms, like Dr. Goldie had expressed, brain-computer interface technology, specifically EEG, is reading, right? It's reading the electrical current that is being generated by your brain through your scalp. So if you think about having a conductive material pressed against your skin, it's picking up electrical current. And as your brain is active or inactive, it's causing like a spike in over time. And so there's this flow of activity that's happening in your brain. And that's essentially how the non-invasive technology works. So EEG is a technology to do that. EMG is another technology to do that. And then there's other technologies out there like ECOG, which is an implantable technology. So some of you may have heard of technologies that are on the horizon that are being developed, or other technologies that can be implanted. But for the most part, brain-computer interface to date has been read-only. It's only reading your brain. So it's trying to capture data coming off of your brain waves, and it directs that information. It digitizes that analog information and it sends it to a computer. And on the computer, engineers and scientists will typically have software that analyzes your brainwave data, and they try and make sense of it. So in a clinical setting, you're trying to understand how the brain works, or what's happening or what's not happening. And it's a delayed response in the sense that you're reading data and you're making judgments on that data. But it's not really a method for controlling a system because it's extremely slow. And in order for you to control a system, it needs to act and respond really quickly based on your intentions. So what we've chosen to do is to take a paradigm around evoked potentials, which Dr. Goldie can talk at great length about, which is using different kinds of stimulation. So the other side of the coin is neurostimulation. So there's different kinds of neurostimulation. There's ways to stimulate the body electrically through electric patterns, galvanic conductance. There's all kinds of ways. There's implants that you can use to direct electrical stimulation deep into the brain for pretty dramatic conditions. So you have this paradigm where you have stimulation and you have reading data. And where technology is going is, well, where it's been has been, these have been separate products. So you either are a stimulation company or you're a reading company, but you don't do both. What's happening over now and probably over the next decade is more and more of the implantable neurotechnologies are going to be duplex, or what's called read and write, where it can stimulate and read what's going on in the brain together. And so what we're doing here with what you're seeing on screen is we're doing that duplex system of writing to the brain and reading from the brain with a wearable headset. And so the way we're stimulating the brain is through the eyes, through visually evoked potentials. And you can also stimulate the brain through audio evoked potentials, as well as through the somatosensory region, which is having to do with the feelings of touch and sensations. We can also stimulate through haptics or vibration patterns. So this is a system that can stimulate the brain through your eyes, ears, and skin. And it can also read those specific signals or those frequencies that we're stimulating. And we can parse those individual signals out of the brain-computer interface. So that's kind of how it works. That's a technical explanation. So in layman's terms, as a user, what makes this extremely different, besides the fundamentals that this is a duplex read and write or write and read system, it's also designed to be completely wireless. It's fully integrated, so all the electronics and all of the processing is happening locally. So there's no dependency on any other computers. So this can be worn anywhere, indoors, outdoors. It's also designed to be low energy. So this can be worn for hours at a time, even up to an entire day. So you can imagine being able to collect all the data over time, which is extremely fascinating for researchers. But for specifically the population we've designed it for, which are individuals with disabilities, we've created it as a control center. It's essentially something that someone can use to use their brain to control an application that's running in augmented reality. And they can select objects that they can see through their eyes by fixating on them. Not necessarily eye gaze, because we're not using any cameras. So we're not really looking at look-at points or very precise eye trajectory. What we're looking at is intention of what object you might be fixating on. So for someone, as an example, who's locked in, who can't move at all, or a late stage ALS, the BCI is extremely important, because if they can't really control the direction of their eyes, it's too fatiguing, then we can also look in their peripheral vision and identify what objects they're looking at, intending to look at. And we can pick those items so that they can click on them and actually make the system do something. So all of that being said, that's how it works. And what we've done is we've designed an application that runs in AR, augmented reality, that's a speech generating app. So the individual person who's wearing it can actually generate speech with a holographic predictive keyboard that they can gaze at and select words or letters and type things out. They can save them, and then they can even send them to an AI assistant that could execute what it is that they want to do. So if they want to turn on and off the lights, or change the radio channel, open a smart door lock, all of that's possible with this system. So it's an extremely powerful system that we've designed, but we've tried to create it in a package that's extremely unassuming and simple, and is really cool looking, that anyone would want to wear, whether you're a child or an adult.
Excellent. And this is so exciting. We've also been sharing this with an amazing collaborative group of assistive technology experts, speech language pathologists, neurologists, and everyone has given us the same feedback. It really is the next step in AAC. I'm going to bring Dr. Goldie back on. There we go, Dr. Goldie. So,
And I get the widescreen.
we were introduced to you through Chris Benedict, an independent consultant here with Cognition, and he'd also been a patient of yours throughout his lifetime. And I recall that the first time we met you, you were so impressed with the initial information which we had shared, which actually wasn't at this level. So it was still very pre-information, you know, and then you were able to come into the office, and we were very PPE'd and protected, but you were able to actually trial the headset and have a firsthand experience with this version. So I would love to get your feedback and have you share with us your impressions so far, and also very specifically, what do you see as the potential significance in terms of application as well as research?
Well, probably one of the first things that I should comment about it is I have had some, let's say, guardian angels in my life who kind of gave me the interest in pursuing aggressively the management of neurologically impaired kids. And back when I was at Stanford, it was actually one of the parents of an autistic child that got me very, very excited about wanting to understand the brain. And then as I progressed through, there were some other important people, but what was the most fascinating was actually the patients themselves, who basically just motivated me to keep pursuing some understanding of how brain interface could be beneficial. And Chris Bennett, he was a major, let's say, guardian for me for understanding what these profoundly damaged brains can do in spite of how terribly disabled they look. Here was this kid that we thought would basically never be able to function at all. And he not only became absolutely fascinated by music, but he started to develop a company that would actually provide the music for parties and for different events. And here he could hardly even move his hands, feet, could not talk. He had incredible difficulties in interacting, but was able to demonstrate himself. And of course, now he's learned this technology where he can really demonstrate how brilliant his mind is hidden inside. And it reminded me of another real motivating person in my life, Dr. Oliver Sacks, a very crazy neurologist, and people probably recognize him from some of his very fascinating books. One I recall very well was his whole series of his own experiences with neurologically injured patients. And he put it into a book that he entitled The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And he goes into vivid detail how because of brain injury, there can be distortions of our visual input. And here, where this fellow, because he had suffered an injury to his vision region of the brain, saw a hat sitting on a chair next to him and thought it was his wife. Now, another major thing was his very comprehensive understanding, kind of appreciation for severely disabled patients with Parkinson's disease, who basically had been just stored away. And they were able to awaken their brains. Now, granted, it was a chemical, L-DOPA. And he then not only wrote the book about it, but it became a movie, Awakenings. And it's kind of what I'm envisioning, that this is an awakening of what's hidden inside the brain and is bringing it out. And another beautiful example, again, from Dr. Oliver Sacks, is his interfacing with Temple Grandin, the very famous autistic, brilliant woman who was considered as profoundly retarded and just kind of hidden away until a therapist kind of began to unlock what was inside. And Dr. Oliver Sacks' time he spent with her, he ended up publishing a book that he entitled An Anthropologist on Mars, which basically was the way that she described the way she felt when she was growing up, because she was kind of had to analyze what was going on around her without really understanding what everything all was. And so she had to go into it and truly try to interface with what other people were appreciating and sensing, because she had such a defect. And it was like being an anthropologist on Mars. So these were major persons. And I must say the other major, say, stimulus to my own interest is Dr. Stephen Hawking's, of course, who over the course of his life, brilliant man, who became so completely paralyzed and disabled, but was able to learn methods of being able to communicate. This is what I think we're doing here, is beginning to awaken these potential brilliant sources of intelligence that have been hidden away in damaged brains. So I see this as a true awakening device.
Thank you, Dr. Goldie. It is fascinating, the area that we're in and the merging of technologies. I'm going to bring Andreas back on to join us. There we go. And I really want to thank you both for taking the time to share with us. This has been so interesting to delve into the space of brain-computer interface from a doctor's point of view, and then also from a technology entrepreneur and just individual's point of view. I love the stories that you've both shared, really humanizing, the work that we are doing. Again, being in the space of speech language pathology, this is the work that we do every day. For those of you that are interested in joining us, please go to cognixion.com and you can find out more information about the company, about the SpeakPros app that we offer, and then you can go to one.cognixion.com for specific information about the headset. We would love for you to join us also on the Brainiac Council. This is our board of expert advisors, and that's if you are an expert in the space, a professional in the space, a parent, or a person who is a user of AAC. We want you to be a part of all of this with us. So thank you so much. Thank you again, Dr. Goldie and Andreas, and thank you for joining us.
It's our pleasure, May. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me. I appreciate the opportunity of being able to help you in this method of awakening disabled patients. And
I love those words, Dr. Goldie. You're the first person that I've heard say that, and words are special. It's a funny talk that we're having here, the importance of language. And one of the things on a closing point, which to the audience that watch this, they may know already, is those that struggle with communication, when they can communicate, they make sure that every word counts. And that's why sometimes with regards to, say, autistic individuals who use keyboards to type, many people think that it's not actually them typing because they're so eloquent in the words that they choose to use and articulate in how they speak or communicate with their technology, that you say, oh, they can't be the ones communicating, but actually they are, because they care about what they're saying and they know that the weight matters of how many characters that they can type out. So they want those to count. And so awakening is a beautiful word.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And come join us at Cognixion.